Circle of Love discussion group. Today we are Vic, Stephanie, and myself, Sissel, from Earth side, and we will see who will come through from the heaven side to discuss the topics we have to have answered today. So, Stephanie.
Thanks, Sissel. This is kind of a special session because we wanted to take up some ancient mysteries. We're kind of on that kick right now because we have the best source in the world right now, and that is those heaven side who can elucidate so many details, and it's so fascinating to me, and it makes so much sense. Did you, Vic? Did you listen to the video about the pyramids and how they were created?
Yes, I did listen to that this morning, and I had a feeling that blocks were levitated, and it's the only thing that makes sense. So my first question was I wanted to dig in a little bit on that, see if there's any insight to how that was done. But we don't have to start right away.
Okay. Well, what I thought was fascinating, how the pyramids, it's all about the upside down view of reality that we have, which we all know. I mean, those people we know, we three know that, but I don't know. I hope a lot of people out there understand that much of society is functioning in an upside down point of view. Everything started from the tip and not the base of reality. And that's why everything has to synchronize. It has to fit together. That's why mathematics works. That's why people can find principles that underlie different phenomena. It's not just random.
No. And that...
So, do you have a question particular? Oh, I'm sorry, Sissel, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that is what makes the world more easy to live in, because you can understand what it is.
Right.
And not try to figure out anything.
Right. If it was totally random, it would do no good to try to figure things out because they wouldn't synchronize. So what question did you have particularly, Vic?
So there's been some reports and some Egyptologists that have looked into how the blocks were moved. One report was that someone with abilities was able to speak to the rocks, and those blocks then moved. So does the circle have any information on how they levitated these blocks and created the pyramids, or anything like that?
I'm sure they will, but I wanted to mention right here that we have previously gotten an extensive story on the history of Moses, because Moses, there's somebody who is a reincarnation of Moses. And one of the things that Moses did is he was also skilled in levitation. And he ultimately turned, the story is very different than it reported in the Bible, but there are lots of things that are have a synchronicity to them. And one is he actually did part the sea. And he did that because he was already skilled in the process of levitation, levitating the stones. And and so they were still levitating at that time, the time of Moses, which was long after the Great Pyramids were built. And as I understand it, anyway, they can clarify that. But he figured if he could do that, he should be able to part the water. And so he practiced, he worked on it. And we told about how I know, hundreds of thousands of people have walked across hot coals. But if you do not have the right mindset, you can get pretty badly burned. And so there's lots of phenomena that can happen that are sort of outside the realm of what we think is possible. Right?
Okay.
Can I add a question? Can I add something while you're on that topic? Because I heard Greg Braden talk about normally in stone you see layers in them, but in these rocks that they used in the pyramid, there are no layers. So he thought they were manufactured. But they mentioned a little bit of it, that it was compressed or something, but maybe he could just elaborate on this.
Yeah, I think they said they had a process that they would use on the stones that would sort of remove impurities in space. But I know that he said that there was hair and other things in the stone. So I don't know. Let me ask. Can you guys explain that? Anyone explain that? Thomas is here. Thomas says the process they utilized was very similar to the process that people use today when they compress blocks of clay into a certain density that will withstand a lot of activity. So just to make this very, very simple so people can understand it, okay? If you take a clay block, it can be very permeable and it can become very sloppy over time because water can penetrate it and it can have impurities in it, etc. But there are processes that people can use that will reduce the ability of the individual molecules to react to the condensation or other forms of inspiration of water or other substances into the clay itself. And these processes will create a block that can be lifted up and used for various purposes. That is a very simple way of trying to explain it. However, the actual chemical reactions and processes are a little bit beyond my ken. We could bring in somebody who has experience in it. However, for now, I would just say that there is a process that they can use without having to pulverize the rock and reconstruct it that would remove the what we will call extra space and deleterious effects of the minerals within it that might cause it to lose its stability and its appearance, because rock also can lose its appearance over time through the natural processes of environmental effect. Does this make sense to you?
Yes.
I'm just going to say me, Stephanie, personally, as I'm translating a lot of this, I get stuff that is unfamiliar to me. And sometimes when they use words or things, it's a little bit slow for me to pick up because it's totally new to me. The more that we visit it, however, the more information we seem to parse out, either because it's easier for me to grasp once I sort of have a picture of what they're talking about, and the fact that they also can bring in other people who have more knowledge. And Thomas can go around and talk to people and say, hey, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. So sometimes over time, we'll get more detailed information on certain subjects.
Yeah.
Right, Thomas? Would you agree with that? Thomas says definitely, because we're just like you. We're gathering information to share. And some of us have memories, but they also stretch back so far into the past that we have to think a little bit in order to grasp our memories, just like you would today. If someone said to you, how did you make that pie? And you haven't made one in 10 years. You might have to think about it a lot to remember exactly how you did it, right?
Yes.
It is the same for us. But the more we think about it, And the more we look back at it and the more we talk to people, the more the memories begin to flow.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Any other specific questions about that? Thomas, do you have anything or anybody have anything to add right now about the pyramids? Beginning from the beginning is the way I look at it. So I'm going to go back and talk to some people about it, and we're going to gather together more information from the experts at the time, because I was not one of the experts at the time of the building of the pyramids, and see how they got it to rhyme and how they made it happen. However, as stated before, the pyramids are much older than most people think they are. And it's due to the way they were constructed that they've been able to withstand the winds of time, you might say, and the floods of time, because the construction was so finely calibrated to leave a lasting memorial or monument, you might say, to the intelligence of a people who have passed away, so that others who would come after would realize that great civilizations have risen and fallen. However, the intelligence of humanity has not faltered. It is just their memories.
Okay.
I have a question on the pyramids. Oh, sorry, Sissel.
Oh, you have
so-
more pyramids, go on.
Oh, yeah, couple more. Why are the pyramids situated in a configuration that is similar to the stars in Orion's belt? Does Thomas know?
Yes, I do. Because this is a subject we have not gotten into very much through our discussions, but there's a lot here to be covered. From the earliest days on Earth, there were people who studied the stars, and they interpreted their experiences in such a way that it became integral to what you today call the study of astrology, not only astronomy. And so they came to see that there is a mimicking of reality through the stars and through the, you might call them the stars on Earth, the people who go through life on this planet, you see, because everything is God energy, and therefore it is replicated in every way. So we would say from that pinnacle where everything begins, it spreads out, but everything has to coordinate, you see. Everything has to work together, and that includes your life. Your life is coordinated to the stars, and the stars are coordinated to your life. Some people tend to say that the stars are what guide us in different ways, of course, because they did guide us when we were navigating the seas in early days. However, they also guide our lives by their particular configurations. What they don't understand is that your life guides the stars. In other words, it's a synchronicity. So it's all coming from the same source. And so you might say, as you look at the stars and you say, well, this planet is in this alignment with this and the other and that, and this means that this and the other and that, you might say, well, my life is in a certain configuration that is being reflected in the stars because it is a synchronicity. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, that was new.
Yes.
And so the alignment of the particular aspects of these great monuments was done with particular attention to detail because they wanted to tell a story, you see. They wanted to tell a story about your soul history because it's reflected in the stars, you see? And so they understood the interplay of the universal trust on God energy. That if you can decipher the story from the stars, you'll be able to decipher the story of humanity. I cannot go into more detail here other than to say that there is a way to decipher what they say, and I will endeavor to find somebody who can provide more information on this. For again, I was not an expert in this area. However, there are some here who were, and we will bring them in the future, and we will talk about this if you would like. However, there is also the question that Steph is raising, without saying it, I can hear her, as to whether this has anything to do with the pharaohs and their trust on being the golden idol, you see, and taken up into the sky, that the Anunnaki would come back and pluck up their embalmed bodies and take them up into the sky where they would live again in immortality. And I have to say it is not, because this tendency to align the pyramids in a certain way predated the time of the Pharisees by quite a lot, you see.
Mm-hmm.
So there will be other interpretations of it, and we'll bring those forward. For now, all you need to know is that it was done deliberately.
Okay.
Any other questions about the pyramids?
Nope.
Then I have a topic I would love to look into.
Okay, what is that?
That is the Easter Island and the statues.
All right. Have we got somebody that can talk about the Easter Island? Thomas will continue. Easter Island is the monumental representation of the rise and fall of a species, you see, because the stone figures on Easter Island were the representations of the ancient astronauts that you know as the Anunnaki. And they were created in order to call out to the forebears of humanity and ask them to return, you see. Please come back and save us. Please come back and save us from our fate. Because at that time on Easter Island, there was a population of people who were trusting on their ability to honor the nobility of the Anunnaki. They were some of the people on Earth that had come to believe that the Anunnaki were the creator gods. However, they did not have the whole story, of course. They did not have the whole story because humanity had lived under the shadow of the Anunnaki spaceship for thousands of years. This meant that its memory was embedded into the memories of the souls who were created at that time. Because just as your earliest memories are so entrenched in your understanding of reality, this memory was entrenched in the earliest consciousness of most of humanity. Not all of humanity, but most of humanity had not known anything different. For the first, we'll say, 10 to 20 lifetimes under the Anunnaki, they lived under the shadow of that spaceship, and they had some understanding of what the Anunnaki looked like, because although the Anunnaki tended to stay in their spaceships and let the Elohim do the hard work of managing the other humans, there were occasions when all of humanity that existed on that particular work site, because there were many work sites on the earth, many. And therefore, there were also many Anunnaki spaceships that visited the earth. And they managed the work site, which was under their control, you see. And this varied through the generations. However, there would be certain work sites that continued for hundreds of years. Well, the mining operations were going on. And so the humans would occasionally see some of the Anunnaki who would come down to the surface of the earth for various purposes. And they formed an image of them, and that image is reflected in some of the stone statues, you see, because they couldn't remember all the details, but the stories would grow through the generations that the Anunnaki were very, very big. They were large individuals, and they stood about 8 feet tall, and they had very, very, very broad shoulders, almost bull-like, which is something I want to mention here because Steph asked me yesterday why in some places the pictures of the Anunnaki have them with a bull with a face on a bull and wings out of the bull. And I wanted to say it is because the Anunnaki had very, very broad shoulders, and they tended to extend to the back, you see, because their shoulders had adapted to their trust on space flight, because they had to use their arms a lot to maneuver in their spacecraft. Over many, many generations, they began to develop shoulders that extended to the back, you see? And this bullish appearance became part of the traditional rendition of the Anunnaki because people would remember that characteristic. And they would say they look kind of like bulls in the way they were designed because they had these powerful shoulders and limbs. And although they stood upright like men do today, they came to represent them as bullish, like bulls, because of the stories, you see. The stories are handed down, and the people begin to make statues, etc., that resemble the stories. And the wings, of course, reflect the fact that the Anunnaki could travel in their little spaceship, what we'll call a shuttle, back and forth from the surface of the earth to the mothership in the sky. And so these stories of their ability to be transported up into the sky reminded them of birds, you see. And so they began to create effigies, you might say, of the Anunnaki with wings. And this is part of the tradition that spread over the world and that is reflected in different parts of the world in different representations of the creator gods as they were considered. Because in that day, they understood that their DNA had come from the Anunnaki. What they did not understand is that the Anunnaki were just playing a part in the creation of humanity in the physical form, because there is a tendency of humanity to become so mesmerized by the physical experience that they are not aware of the non-physical until you reach a certain level of intelligence and experience. For example, you cannot design an internet. You cannot fathom the atom or the electron or the other forces of nature. And you can't find the place where the non-physical intersects with the physical, you see, because that's what it is. You might say that mathematics is part of the non-physical because it is part of the concept of the synergy from the pinnacle. It is the idea of a principle that underlies various phenomena, you see. But the ability to understand the various phenomena will take many, many lives to understand. In other words, people can recognize that trees have certain structure, and they'll say, that's a tree, and that's a tree, even though they don't look that much alike. But they have certain characteristics alike, such as trees are known to grow from a seed or from a very small sapling and to extend into the sky. And they can provide shade, and some of them can provide fruit. And so they all get lumped into a certain category called trees. However, this is only a sort of primitive ability to categorize your reality in a way that will help you see the synchronicity all around you. So the ability to understand the synchronicity between the stars and the human experience was a very refined ability, you might say. And it came because of the soul energy that was there back in the day of the Anunnaki, because one individual who'd had a very long history, you might say an old soul, began to study the stars, even while the Anunnaki were here, and to understand the progression and recession of the heavenly bodies that affected life on Earth, you see, and therefore that the consciousness of humanity is like a universe in itself that reflects the continual moving of the planets within it in a effort to constantly balance its energy, because the universe has to be balanced, of course, just like the individual soul consciousness must balance. And so on Easter Island, the people were looking to the Anunnaki to come and save them, you see, because they were stuck on an island and they couldn't escape it. And they had come from another place or places. I'd have to look into the history to see how they came to be there, where they had other options, you see. They had other animals, they had other plants, they had the ability to communicate with other groups from other regions and exchange, you see, but they were lost on this island. And they survived, of course, and they developed their own society in a way that worked for them. However, they couldn't get back to the mainlands, you see, and they couldn't make the people see that they missed their old reality. They wanted to find this place says that were represented in the stories, you see, because the adults passed the stories on to the children. And the children heard stories of places far away that sounded pretty gay, and they thought, well, we'd like to play that way. And their parents said, well, then you have to appeal to the creator gods. And they tried to describe the creator gods to their children and say they always watched out for us. You see, they always fed us. They always gave us a place to sleep. They could move us around from place to place, you see, because they could take us up into the spaceships in the sky and they could move us just like they could move themselves, you see. And they always would pick us up one by one, take us into the sky, and say, hey, you'll live forever with us in luxury. And so the people on the island began to build these edifices to attract the attention of the Anunnaki and say, hey, we're here, we love you, come save us, come save us. And that is the origin of the trust on the figures that you see. Now, this all went down a long time ago, and there was, even at that time, some knowledge of the ability to transcend physical reality, as we talked about earlier, with levitation and walking on hot coals, etc. And they began to experiment with it and to say, well, this is the way the Anunnaki did play. They could move huge stones because they could in their day. They had many processes where they could rip open the earth and unearth a lot of the minerals they wanted, and they could also take the substances they found on earth and transform them into different structures that would fit their needs, you see. And so the people on the island began to say, hey, there must be a way, there must be a way, there must be a way. And whenever you say there must be a way, because you trust that there must be a way, you will find it, you see. It might not happen immediately, but God always responds to your desires. God will always give you what you ask for. Always, always, always. However, when you have different kinds of requests that cancel each other out, God says, what the F am I supposed to do? Because I can't give you what you want because you want this and you want the other, and they don't go together. And so I have to figure out a way to give them both to you in a way that you might not like, but have to do it because that's the way it has to work. And everything you ask for, of course, has to be part of the balance of energy. And so in creating the great figures that you see, the islanders destroyed their own world, you see. They trusted on the Anunnaki to come and save them, and they didn't trust on their own ability to manage their own environment, you see. They were looking to be saved by something outside themselves and not taking into account what they were doing to their own world, you see. And eventually, they did what we all do, it seems, in this cyclical pattern of the rise of civilizations and their fall. And they began to overpopulate and overuse their resources to the point in which their people began to lose their good vibration on life, you see, because they couldn't get enough food and etc. to maintain life on that island. That might have supported a smaller population for a lot longer. But because they trusted on the visitors from the sky that would come and save them, and not their own capacity to figure it out, they didn't figure it out in time. Just like on Earth today. People that say, well, the aliens are going to come and save us, because there are some people like that, are not trusting on their own ability to figure things out from ground level and say, hey, we got to change the way we're living. We got to change the way we're living. We got to figure this out. So that's the story of Easter Island, you see.
The statues in Hawaii are very similar to the ones in the Easter Island. The difference is that in Hawaii, the statues are angry. They have a lot of angry look. And are there some similarity in who made them?
The Hawaiian Islands were populated a long time ago when the Earth's surface was very different, because there was a period when the ocean's water was actually lower than it is today. And they were able to travel through the more shallow seas gradually in order to access those islands, you see. And they brought with them, of course, the same culture that had spread throughout the world, because this culture of trust on the creator gods, the Anunnaki, was the initial confusion of humanity, and it spread everywhere. And it has continued even to this day, because even though the Christians say that they only trust on one God, all you have to do is walk into their churches and see that they make gods of everybody that they can, that you can pray to, and they will come and save you one way or another, right? And so this tendency to look out your side of yourself for something that will save you from yourself is the tendency to trust on the creator gods. The ability to look inside yourself and see that you are the trust on God energy is the ability to come to see that you are one with everything you see. So this old tendency to look for a savior outside of yourself was the problem from the beginning, because the humans at that time hated the Elohim. They hated the Elohim because they said they forced the Anunnaki to go away, and therefore they had to figure out how to feed themselves and clothe themselves and find a place to live, because when you're a slave, all those needs are taken care of for you. And so they soon forgot about the part that they had to play, where they had to go down in the mines and say, oh my God, will we ever see the light again? Because they were so confused when the Anunnaki went away, and they had to take care of their own basic needs, you see. And this is a tendency that continues today, because people don't want to take care of their own basic needs and say, we have to take care of ourselves. They just want others to take care of them. And they fight each other to be the golden idol and to rise to the top of the food chain, you might say. So in Hawaii, there is a trust on an ancient god that was so angry because the people would not do what he told them to. And they trusted that when they made this God so angry, the God punished them and went away and said, I won't come back until you learn to play the way I tell you to. And I want you to do what I tell you to. And then I'll come back, you see, and spare you from the rising sea, because the sea did rise, of course, after that low period. And it began to swallow up some of the land that had previously been habitable. And it isolated the islands more and more from each other. And this was a sign that they were not pleasing the gods, you see. And so they began to trust on the displeasure of the creator gods who created them, and who said, if you were better and honored me, then I wouldn't be causing the sea to rise up and swallow you, because they thought the sea would keep rising and eventually swallow them, you see, unless they could appease the gods. And there's a lot more to this story, of course, because the Hawaiian Islands were visited after Atlantis sunk into the sea by one of the very, very refined intelligences of that time. And this helped them to learn to rhyme in a different way because they were very fierce people. They were very angry people because they were angry because they had been abandoned, you see, by the Anunnaki. So they themselves were very angry and they took out that anger on each other. See, they were cruel in the way they treated each other just because they were so frustrated by their circumstances, like a lot of people are. And eventually, as they began to see that there was more benefit to working together and having a respect for the elders, they began to create a kinder society. And they actually became a very kind people through the intervention of someone who came to the islands after the sinking of Atlantis and gave them much more technical assistance in their living circumstances and left behind his own progeny that would continue to spread his DNA into the populations and help them to understand that they didn't have to trust an outside intervention. They could figure out how to save themselves, you see.
Thank you.
Okay, Stephanie. This whole discussion brought to mind the story in the Bible of the Tower of Babel. Was that also an attempt to reach the Anunnaki by people?
Can you guys say anything about the Tower of Babel? Do you know anything about that? Steve can talk to this question. Once upon a time, everybody spoke the same language because it was the same language they learned from the Anunnaki, you see, because the Anunnaki had to communicate with them. And even though the Anunnaki had a different timbre, you might say, or a different vibration to their vocal cords, so they could not be understood by the humans who had a different vibrational register, they had a device that they could use that would enable them to communicate with the humans. They communicated primarily with the Elohim, and the Elohim taught the others the language, you see? And they all had one language. And then gradually, over time, they began to move apart. And of course, they were killing each other at that time because they were so jealous of anyone who could create more prosperity for themselves than they could for their own families or their own small groups. And so they were kind of like roving vigilantes that would destroy anything that was actually helpful to all of humanity, because they would destroy any sign of a civilization that was superior to their own. They would take what they could. They would leave behind their own DNA because they would rape the women. And if any women survived, they would likely have children by their assailants. And so there grew up families of humanity that looked different in appearance but resembled each other. And they also began to talk in a different way because they began to use other words that would describe their own situations. And they began to distrust each other because they couldn't even communicate with each other anymore. And so there came a day when they would say, hey, we can never play together because we have no ability to communicate with each other. And so one day, someone came to say, well, we have to figure this out, people, because we can't distrust each other just because we talk a different language. And so he went away and he listened to what the people would say. And they said, well, our language is the best. And others would say, well, our language is the best because he was able to study their languages, you see. So believe it or not, back in that day, there was someone who was a very advanced linguist. And he came to say, we need to change the way we play. And so we need to all begin to speak the same language, you see, because God made us all equal. And because God made us all equal, no language is better than any other. And no people are better than any other. So let us create a new way to integrate our choices for how we're going to live, you see. And so they began to integrate their world in a new way. Because several of these tribes came together and they did say, well, we want to play in the new way. We want to be able to stay together and live together and not fight each other. And so they began to live that way until one day someone said, this is very important in the USA today. Someone said, you took away our traditional way of life. You forced us to live your way. And we don't want to live your way. We want to live the way we used to live historically because we were better than you. We were better than you. And this began a breakdown in the society, you see, because people began to say, no, you weren't better than us. If you'd been better than us, you wouldn't have lost your language, you see. You wouldn't be the ones that were having to live the way we all live. And so there was so much disruption that occurred in this society that once again, they broke apart, you see, into these different parts that could not agree. And so they began to battle each other until they had ripped apart their society. The Tower of Babel is a monument to the time when the people began to disrupt their harmonious lifetime, you see, by returning to the old way of fighting each other over who was better. And it was like saying that we have descended into chaos again. We have descended into chaos, and it is better that we let each other know that we can't live this way, you see. And so the Tower of Babel is really a testament to the good auspices of the people who said, hey, I dread to tell you that our society was disintegrated by the tendency of people to want to play in their own way and not to want to come together because they all think that they're better than everybody else. And so you might say they began to go away. And so the society split apart once again into its different parts. And that is, of course, the way that we came to understand Babel. That when you babble, you're not able to be understood by others, you see. You all think that you have your own trust on reality, and you can't integrate in a way that will say, hey, we're all the same, and we can take a little bit of your language and a little bit of ours, and we can put it together, and we can figure out how to live in peace and harmony. So it was another testament to the human capacity to trust on the golden idol. Whether it is individually, they are better than everybody else, or as a society. And so it's a good lesson for the USA because there are different polarities within this country that pull at each other and say, hey, you're to blame. You're to blame. You're to blame for taking away our native lifestyle. You're to blame for not growing up and realizing that you have to act like other people. You're to blame for crossing that border and trying to disrupt our homogenous society, etc. You see? Okay, hope that makes sense. I know nothing about the Tower of Babel, actually, other than the name.
Makes sense.
Who is said to have created it?
The legend goes that the people created this massive tower in order to reach God, but then God or the gods come down and they say, "Look what the people have achieved. If we let them do this, they will be able to do anything." So then the gods knock over, they destroy the tower, so the people will not be unified. And then they scramble the people's language so they can never come together and create again.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Like I said, I've only know the name. I didn't know the history of the story. Okay, so Vic, how are you for time?
I might need to jet, so I'll take off and we'll meet again.
All right. I will thank you for being here, and we'll probably close up as soon as you are gone, unless you can stay that long.
All right, I'll see you all later.
Okay, bye-bye, Vic. Any closing thoughts here from anybody? Placing my trust on my ability to help you see that there are so many stories from the people that reflect their trust on having to please the creator gods, you see? And that becomes their tendency to try to describe everything as in terms of pleasing the gods or angering the gods, you see? So that theme will show up over and over and over again in the annals of history.
It does.
Any last thoughts, Sissel?
Yeah, it dawned on me too. The more I learn, the more I see how the belief in the Anunnaki and letting them take care of them rule their mindset, and that has been taken over from generation to generation, forgetting that they had to go into the mine and stay out of the daylight the whole day. They didn't think of the labor and all the hard work, only that they were here taking care of us. We want them back.
If we just do what they tell us to,
Yeah.
they'll take us up to their spaceship in the sky. We build I suppose, I never heard that story again, but if we build a high enough steeple, they always use the term the steeple as kind of the image of the dogmatic approach in humanity that is founded in this confusion If we build a high enough peak, I guess the gods will save us. I don't even know what the Tower of Babel looks like, but if we can build it to the sky, they'll notice us and they'll come back and say, hey, they're trying to reach us. They're doing what we told them, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's confusing.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank the circle for being here today, Steve and Thomas,
Thank you so much.
and anybody who's tuned in. And if you have questions, be sure and give them to us. And like I say, as we explore these topics, we may get more details, which is, it's all interesting to me. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back.
Yeah.
Right, Sissel?
Yes, we will. Thank you.